Have you ever worked at a company that has not been aligned with your personal values?
Maybe you're a staunch environmentalist, but you work at an oil company.
Or is a paycheck just a paycheck?
Girls gotta eat. On today's episode of Per My Last Email, we explore how your personal values matter or don't at work. Let's get into it. Kayla, a light subject on the podcast today.
Super chill
Talking
today.
morality. I feel like I'm back in my philosophy classes of college.
Yeah.
I'm very excited. It is a super interesting topic. To caveat before the pitchforks get out, we're not the morality police. We're here to explore our opinions on this.
So you say.
But we're not here necessarily to tell you what to do, but maybe provide a framework on how you think about or should think about.
And how we think about it. It's just a fun thing for us to talk about.
It's very fun.
And actually, the reason why I brought up this topic is something I wanted to talk about is because of my role right now.
Yeah.
I've been like in my personal life, like really thinking about what consumerism means and like trying to buy less and engage less with, you know, the dumb shit in the world, right? Like I don't need like an 8th keychain, you know?
Yeah.
But
your keychains are pretty fire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I just found it was funny that my job, at least a good portion of it, is selling products. Yeah. And so it's like, am I working in a way that is misaligned with my values? I, to be honest, don't really think so right now. But if, you know, somebody, let's say like the CEO, Austin, came to me and was like, we are going to start selling trinkets and they're going to be made of like net new plastic and it's going to be like no value to anybody.
We're buying a mine so we can get it straight from the earth, this new
like
plastic type.
I would at least hopefully push back and if it continued, like probably have to reevaluate. But that's not what's going on here. So this is why I was kind of like, oh my gosh, I feel like probably other people are facing this also. And so I wonder for you, have you ever experienced something similar? I feel like you've worked at really good places.
I think so. When I grew, like, this is my journey into like thinking about impact, which is I grew up and I felt like I was like so lucky. Like I was very privileged. I grew up in a good neighborhood. My parents are fantastic. I felt like I had a lot of opportunities afforded to me. So when I thought about my personal values and the impact, I thought, okay, I should leverage my privilege to like do something good in the world. That just felt right to me. So that's why I did direct service with AmeriCorps. I was like, the best way to make an impact is like go direct to the source and work with people like on the ground and try to make a better world. And that felt like the right thing to do at the time. I think going through it, you realize that like the world is just very complicated and you can have an impact with direct service, but sometimes you can have a much bigger impact, like, you know, working in finance, taking half your money and donating it, for example.
Ooh, I have big feelings about this. Okay, go.
So like there's just a lot of different ways to think about like your impact. And I think my framework is the impact you have in the world doesn't need to be just about where you work. Like it can be about how you vote. And if you vote in all different types of elections, local all the way up to national, it can be about how you take your resources, namely like the money you make from whatever job you have, and use that to fund causes that you care about. It can be about like showing up and doing direct service in your community. So I think you just have to look at impact at a very holistic level and not just like I work for this company and that's all I am to the world and that's my full impact. You should think about it in a broad scope.
Yeah. So you've mentioned 2 things that I'd like to talk about. First of all, yes, it is true that you are not your work and you have other elements of your identity, but you're also spending a third of your life doing a job, 8 hours a day. And for example, I'm going to come up with one that's kind of silly, but like if you're a vegan and your job is butchering cows, like that grates on you, you know, like your job is actively perpetuating something that you don't necessarily believe in. I think, first of all, it's a very personal choice. Maybe you have reasons why you want to be a butcher. As a vegan, again, I don't know that. I think that's probably maybe there's 2 people in the entire world that have that job. But it's like, okay, that sounds immoral to me.
I mean, yeah, I guess I wouldn't use the term immoral. I would just say that what I think you're articulating, which I think is a great point, is you should understand what your values are. And if you're working for a company where every day you're like I believe X, but like I'm kind of doing Y, eventually it probably wears on you and it like breaks you down. And it's not like a life that you want to live. So I'm not telling anyone what their values should be. I just think understanding what they are is very important. And then don't put yourself in a position where like you're constantly grading up against those values, because I think that leads you to a path of just feeling pretty miserable.
Yeah, I agree. So just to outline really quick.
Yeah.
My position on this is, first of all, it's a spectrum, all the asterisks, all the like, don't get mad at me.
Yeah.
But I do think that it is immoral to work at a company that directly is misaligned with your personal values. Mm-hmm. But I think that line gets fuzzier and fuzzier the farther down the spectrum you get. So, for example, if I was an environmentalist, as you mentioned, working at an oil company,
yeah,
I would have a really hard time, regardless of the role I was in, mm-hmm. taking that job and working there, because my view could be that company was perpetuating harm to the earth, and something that I find really abhorrent.
Yeah. My only pushback on that, which I think at its surface, like it makes total sense. My only pushback is I think we quickly get to a place where, say you are an environmentalist, if you could like work your way up through an oil company,
boo.
What?
Yeah, okay, I'm gonna start as a financial analyst, and I'm gonna work my way up, and I'm gonna make change.
All I'm saying is, if we start like, if you take this and like scale it to every person in the United mm-hmm. States, like oil companies can have a massive impact, obviously, on the environment. Yeah. And like right now, probably on net, it's negative. A lot of them are trying to, at least they're telling us they're trying to transition to more green energy. I think it would be helpful if a lot of people who really believed in that transition and like knew how to pull it off and could like get resources internally to change how some of these companies operate, like to me, that would be a massive net positive. Now, I'm not saying it's as easy as like, oh yeah, you just get an entry-level job and the CEO is asking you how to lead their green energy transition team. But in general, I think the more people that have opinions about the environment that you believe in, you'd want them working at companies that have the power to actually do something about it. Mm. Right?
I guess, but it's just like, I think that I didn't want to say it this early, but there is no ethical consumption under capitalism. And I think that when you're working in a company that is incentivized mm-hmm. to maximize value for shareholders, we've talked about this quite a few times, maximize value for shareholders, that incentive is misaligned with your like values. And I don't think that a company is going to, unless forced, not just by the people internally, but externally, I don't think that they're going to I don't think that an oil company is going to be like, wow, a lot of people in here are all like green, and therefore we're going to quit doing what we're doing and transition over to green energy, even though it means that we're going to lose billions of dollars of profit and, our stock price is going to drop by 80%. Yeah, I just don't think that's ever going to happen.
There's definitely constraints. And I think, not that we have to belabor this point, I think my argument is that if you can, within those constraints, steer the ship a little bit more towards hey, actually there's a really good long-term vision we can have about the green energy transition that does make us more money and doesn't crash the environment. If you can at least be in the room when decisions are made, maybe you can move the needle 1%, and maybe that net, because the companies are so big, leads to more impact than you go work for an environmental nonprofit that just doesn't really move the needle at all. So I wouldn't judge anyone in your case of the vegan butcher. I would need to understand what they're trying to accomplish and hear them out at least, rather than just write everyone that works at those companies off.
Yeah, no, I don't think we should write them off. I also think that something that's very important is that we need paychecks.
Yeah.
And if the vegan person lives in, Butcher Town, and the only jobs that are available are working at the butcher or whatever at a factory farm, you can't really judge that person for needing to put food on the table.
Yeah.
And, leafy greens are expensive. Mm-hmm. So I understand wanting to butcher animals.
Yeah, that's an important caveat, which is there is just general constraints in your life. You need to take care of your family. Mm-hmm. You need to pay rent. You need to buy things in order to live. And it's a very privileged position to say, you should never work at a company that doesn't 100% align with your values, and you're a bad person if you mm-hmm. do. To me, that's a ridiculous statement. You don't understand the constraints that person has, which is they need a paycheck too. And so I think it's very easy for people who work for a company that like pays them a decent amount of money and like isn't super like negative in the world to say, oh, like I would never do that. Well, you're not in a situation where you'd have to make that tough choice. And I think a lot of us say we would make the choice, but it's until you're in that situation, I don't think there's a way to accurately predict if you would or not.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I also think that with some exceptions, my understanding of these like closer to bad companies in terms of the like morality spectrum pay a shit ton for jobs. So like there's a premium there. Like we're so sorry that you're working at a company that maybe is profitable but like doesn't align with your values. Here's 20% more than you could get anywhere else.
Yeah.
Like, that's enticing too. I understand that. Like it's not like the job won't get done. Somebody else is gonna get that job.
Yeah.
So like might as well be you.
Well, okay, so this is also going back to like the argument I was talking about, like the environmentalist at Exxon.
Yeah.
Like someone is going to have that job, and like if you have a certain view that you think is better than the other person they would hire if you don't take the job, like there is like kind of, this is like getting into effective altruism, which we can talk about and is like,
I'd love to talk about
that. I mean, I'm not a proponent of it. And it's taken a beating in recent years, aka SBF, just blowing up the entire world. But they're like, I understand how people can think like that. And it's the same way with like, okay, I'm going to go work for this company and then I'm going to donate a bunch of money. And like on the whole, I'm making more of an impact than if I went to work for the companies I donate individually. It's just it's a very complicated issue.
Yeah, so I want to talk about effective altruism because it is something that I wrote down. I said effective altruism is mostly BS. I think at the beginning so effective altruism is the idea that you can make more impact by donating money or placing money where you view the most good can occur versus doing it yourself.
And to give you a concrete example, I worked for AmeriCorps. I was paid $12,000.
Yeah.
That's the cost of an AmeriCorps member to do work. So, or I could go, so I did my direct service, or I could go work for a company that pays me $200K and I could send $100K to the nonprofit and that pays for 5 AmeriCorps workers.
Yeah.
And now I've done 5x the impact.
Right.
So it's the idea that like there's multiple levers that you can pull to have an impact. And it doesn't need to be you doing the work in order to have the biggest impact in the world.
Yes, and I think that the proponents, I did read the Wikipedia page earlier today. So
Okay.
I am a pro at this. I'm an expert. But the original proponents were saying live extremely frugally and donate the rest of your income to the causes that you view can move the needle the most. And I think the bastardization really happened with SBF and his so Sam Bankman-Fried, for those of you who have perhaps lived under a rock for the past few years.
I'm jealous of you.
Ran FTX, which is a crypto exchange company that basically him and his lackeys or whatever used effective altruism in order to justify their misdeeds.
Yeah.
And under the guise of donating their money to places that they viewed could have massive impact. Obviously, that blew up. It turns out he was misusing money a lot, and also he was living extremely lavishly.
Yeah.
So he was taking money from sources, donating it to other people, perhaps illegally, and then, of course, those donations then had to be clawed back. The impact was negated.
The common complaint against effective altruism, what you're getting at, is like you kind of want some guardrails around what you are willing to do in order to drive the impact you want. Like, an effective altruist theoretically could say like, okay, like you should murder this person because on the whole, it's going to lead to a better society. But like, we don't want people running around murdering people, obviously.
Right.
So like there needs to be some constraints. And it's like this idea that you can accurately predict exactly like what is going to happen if you do certain actions and that you can run this mathematical formula that like tells you this is higher impact. It's just much more complicated than that.
Yeah, and I think that maybe it could be used as a justification for taking a job that is misaligned with your personal values. If you say, well, I'm going to donate more than the impact I would have been able to have if I worked at a nonprofit, for example. And I think that, yes, perhaps if you go into, I don't know, a defense company and then donate all of your revenue or all of your leftover discretionary income to a peacekeeping organization, sure, but the reality is you're probably going to take some of that money and you're going to buy a new purse, or, you're going to buy a nicer house.
Yeah.
And then it's like, do you have those like quote unquote golden handcuffs of, well, I have this really nice lifestyle. And yes, I did used to donate a lot of it to this peacekeeping organization, but now, I've given them enough money. Like, I'm going to keep working here and I'm going to keep working misaligned with my values, but the payday is really good.
Yeah.
Like, I just feel like it's a slippery slope and people use it to justify making decisions that they wouldn't normally make. And we'll be right back after this. Okay, back to the show.
I think that your personal values is less about what you say and more about what you do. And so if you're in a situation where you're constantly saying, I believe this, but your actions are counter to that, then I would just argue that like you're kind of lying about what your personal values are. Because to me, it's like, what are your actual actions? And so in that instance, I would just say like the person's values are not what they pretend they are. They're exactly what they're doing. And sometimes it's just easy to say like, yeah, I would love to do this or I do that, but it's actually what you do that defines like what your values are.
And I think that when we're talking about this, like the role that you play within a company is also very important. So for example, if you're, the person like clubbing seals or whatever, like that's your closer.
A very common job. We have one at Morning Brew.
Yep. Yeah. You're very close to the harm that is being done by the company. And if you are, in the HR department of the SEAL clubbing organization, like you're a little bit farther removed. So I guess, would you, in that situation, like where do you draw the line?
Yeah, I think this is not, so I would say there's like two pieces of morality or values. There's like figuring out what your values are, which I think is very important. But then you also have to make a decision of like, do you believe that your values are right and that it's like incumbent upon you to convince other people that they're right? And I actually think that's where a lot of tension is. Like, I wouldn't fault, like, I have my personal values. I have companies that I wouldn't work for, or there's jobs that I wouldn't do. Do I feel so strongly that I have to go to people doing those jobs and like yell at them? Personally, I don't. I don't know their story. We've talked about the constraints. Maybe they need a paycheck. Maybe they don't have the same morality as me. And I think personally that's fine. So, would I work in the HR department of the SEAL clubbing organization that you've invented?
Really bad. Like, I don't know.
No, I wouldn't do that, but I'm lucky enough where I could get a job where I wouldn't have to do that and I could feel better about it. So like, it is just a very personal choice. And I have some interesting stats here about how people feel about this. Blue Beyond Consulting, a consulting company that helps companies apparently with like value creation and internal culture, said 80% of people said working for a company that aligns with their values is super important. And 50% of people would actually quit their job if company values did not match their own. I think that's very inflated. I think I don't necessarily believe that.
I think people would say that.
Yeah, exactly. And then Qualtrics ran a survey where it said 39% of workers and 51% of Gen Z employees said they'd leave based on who the company does business with, which is very interesting. So like if you're working with vendors, you don't believe in their mission, you'd actually quit. And it seems like Gen Z is a little more, they care more about that. So this does matter to workers, or at least they say it matters to workers. So people are thinking about this. And I think it's good that people are thinking about this.
Of course. I mean, I think that this is important to think about.
Yeah.
I also don't know like the timeline on this. Like if somebody let's talk about consulting, because I think with the vendors stat, that's very interesting. Like consultants have a variety of different clients all the time. And if you're a consultant, you are kind of have the ability to do outsized impact at a company. You're basically coming in and you're saying, this is how I would change the strategy. This is what I would do differently. That can like have a really big impact on how that company operates. If the companies or organizations that you're working for it's like, this is going to be so bad. So this is not real, but like, how do we like get away with more crime?
Yeah.
And you're like, here's how
you're consulting with the mafia.
Yeah, with the mafia. And you're like, here's how to increase, crime by 20% without getting caught. Like, obviously consultants don't do that. And I don't think that they do, but like, well, whatever. But that's bad. versus like, here's how a nonprofit can maximize your dollars or get more donations or whatever, market better, have better impact. Like I think with consultants, that's very interesting. You're working with a wide variety of different clients. And I wonder if people would quit because one or two of those clients are unsavory. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the way you framed it is how I would think about it, which is I don't think consulting is good. I don't think consulting is bad. Consulting is neutral. Like it's something you do. It's about who are you consulting with? What advice are you giving those clients? And what impact does that advice lead to? And I mean, there's been cases where consulting companies obviously have worked with unsavory companies. It's had a lot of damage to society. And in some cases, there's been massive fines levied against these consulting companies. Yeah, personally, like if I could find another job, I wouldn't work on those teams. Would I work for a consulting company that's advising companies that, you know, and it's, I think, a net impact or like neutral? Of course. So I just think you have to get a little deeper. It's so easy to say like consulting's bad, defense tech is bad. We write everyone off. I just don't think that's the case. I think you have to look almost like on a team by team, role by role basis of what you're actually doing. At least that's how I would go about it.
Yeah, I don't know. I think some of those things that you named are probably net bad, but I think that that's my opinion.
Yeah, exactly. That's your opinion. And so I guess my question is, if I think you're alluding to like defense tech, do you have friends that work for like a consulting company you don't think is good or like a defense company that you don't think is good? Like, would you not be friends with someone that works for one of these companies?
I don't think that I have any friends that I can think of right now that work for a company or an industry that I find immoral.
Yeah.
I don't think that's because I have cut people out of my life for working at immoral. I just think that, this is going to sound bad, but like I think that the people that I am friends with would have similar reactions to me and would probably not want to work in those industries. But that doesn't mean that like if I had a friend and they were like, by the way, I'm going to go move to defense tech, I'd be like, and we're never speaking again.
Yeah.
I'd be interested in in the why.
Yeah. I mean, I have friends that work for defense tech companies and like, I don't think that they're all bad people.
No,
and
I don't think that people are net bad.
Breaking news in the pod. So I don't know. I think, but it is easy to take some of the arguments that people have and like kind of get to that level where you're like, okay, well, I just think that industry is terrible. And so, and I personally want to work for that industry, and anyone that works for that industry is a bad person. Okay, I know a lot of people that do work for them, and I don't think that they're bad people. And I think when you actually hear about the work they're doing and why they're doing it, I think it just changes your opinion a little bit about the actual importance of some of these industries. Yeah,
and I think that we can also, we can probably all agree that the SEAL clubbing organization is a net bad, right? But I think as soon as we start talking about like actual real companies that are not the company that I just made up, like there's nuance there. And I think when we're talking about certain industries, maybe like oil and gas, maybe like defense, it feels like most people probably cluster them towards more divisive.
Yeah.
But for example, is it immoral to work at a fast food restaurant? Right? Is it immoral to work at a company that perpetuates poor nutrition standards?
Yeah.
Right? Like, you know, a unnamed fast food company, right? Like if you're a cashier selling burgers, is that immoral because you're providing people with high sodium content?
Yeah, not at all. I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really tough because you have to exist.
If Big Macs went away, I would be devastated, personally.
Yeah, but that's great. But it's just like, okay, you know, what about if you work at a grocery store that traditionally doesn't have stores located in food deserts and therefore are contributing to poor education or poor nutrition standards?
Yeah.
Like you can always find something. And I think even as you go towards the like net good on the spectrum, there's going to be, you can't really 100% be confident that your company is doing things 100% morally all the time. Yeah,
I think if you start playing that game, you quickly find that you can't work anywhere.
Yeah.
Or the places that you can work at are so ineffective at actually driving any societal change that you kind of have to be like, well, what's the point of working at those places too? So again, like I think where I land is you can have all these different conversations, arguments about what's moral, what's not, what are your values, what aren't. I think it just matters about figuring out what matters to you. And I would say like defining the impact you want to have. Like I wrote some down, like when you talk about impact at work, is this like societal impact? Like you want to have large scale impact across the country or across the world? Like, okay, then choose accordingly. Is this about direct service? Do you want to be really close to the people or the communities or the areas that you help, and it feels really good to you to like get your hands dirty and like actually be there? Then go do direct service. Does impact to you mean like, you know, working at a team and feeling like the people that are on your team like each other and they feel good at work and they're having a good experience, and that really matters to you? So there could be a million different ways you define impact and you define your values. I think it's just you'll live a better life if you have clarity on those. And then for me personally, like I'm going to let other people figure out what their values are. And unless it's an aberration, like, okay, like you live your life, I'm living my life. That is what diversity of thought and diversity of like having different people with different values is all about.
Yeah. Well, I think that was pretty heavy. So I have a game.
Okay.
And it's a fun game, okay?
Yeah.
I promise. Would you work for? And I'm gonna give you a situation and you're gonna tell me, would you work for this situation? And I do not name any companies, so you can sit tight.
Here we go. This is where I get canceled.
Would you work as the head of marketing at a vape company?
No.
Why?
I don't like vape companies.
Okay. Would you?
But with the caveat that like, do I have other job options? Like
Right.
all of that stuff. But yeah, if I have choices, personally, I don't want to work in that industry.
Yeah. Okay. Would you work for a company that has donated millions of dollars to causes you disagree with?
It depends on the causes, but yeah, I don't really have a problem with that.
Yeah. I personally would not. If my efforts are creating profit that is going to causes that I don't agree with.
Let me push back.
Okay.
So is it the company that's giving the donations, or is it executives of the company giving the donations?
The company.
Your answer.
The company.
Okay, but why do you think that it's the company directly when you're working for a company? The ability for the company to make money generates individual profit for executives, and those executives donate to organizations that if the company donated to directly, you would be opposed to.
I think I would have a really hard time working at a company where the executives were also doing the same donations. But it's hard to know. Like you can't, like not all of those are disclosed.
So you think it's just an issue of transparency. But if I came to you and could prove that executives were donating to organizations you didn't like, you would quit your job.
I think it depends on which organizations.
All right.
If it was something I felt really strongly about.
Yeah.
Okay. Another light. This is a light game. Light game.
I love how you're like, this is a pretty dark episode. Let's lighten this up. And here we are.
Here we are. Okay. Two more. First, would you work for a boss that has wildly different political views and brings it to work?
The end brings it to work part, no. Like, that would just be annoying. Yeah. Like, don't do that. So I would be miserable and I would leave if I could.
Cool. Same. And then finally...
But I think the more interesting question is that doesn't bring it to work.
Yeah.
And for me personally, I have no problem with that.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things that, like, if it's not preventing me from doing my work or I don't really have to know about it, then if they're in your face about it, then it's going to be harder and maybe you ask for a different boss.
I feel like we are consultants because every part of this episode just gets to it depends. But like, this is where like, okay, some people are going to hear wildly different political views and think one thing, which is like, they don't think that this group should have like rights. Like that's a way more uncomfortable person to work with than like, they think the effective tax rate for a small business should be 12.5%, and I think it should be 11.6%.
Right.
So there's definitely, I would have to understand what those political differences are, but for the most part, like within the realm of reasonableness, I'm totally cool with that.
Yeah.
And in fact, I could probably learn something from them because I bet not every single one of my political views is actually accurate and right. It's just what I believe at this current time.
Yeah. And also for that one, for the boss that has different political views, if it's like, I don't believe that you should have rights, then that's going to impact your career as well.
Correct. Yeah. Probably want to avoid that boss.
You should. That actually feels like a net okay to say everybody should feel comfortable leaving that situation.
Yes.
And lastly,
okay,
a consulting firm that has unsavory clients.
I would work for a consulting firm that has unsavory clients, but I would not work for a consulting firm where I'm placed with an unsavory client. Again, with the obvious caveats that there's probably some crazy examples that would make me not want to work for the company at all. But like, yeah, I need money. And if the work I'm doing personally, I'm like, I feel good about this particular client that I'm consulting with. And, we're working with some other clients that like, I personally don't really think are good to the extent that they're not the worst things ever. I would be cool with that.
Okay. Aligned.
That was a fun game.
That was fun. I felt like that was a nice way to wrap it up.
Should we roll the credits?
Let's do it.
All right. Our producer is Michaela Heck.
Our technical director is Uchenna Ogu.
A.B. Silver is our senior booking producer.
And our chief content officer is Devin Emery.
This show is a production of Morning Brew.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, y'all.
Are you a vegan who cuts up cows all day?
How would you describe your audience? Yeah, this is a podcast for vegan butchers. We have a total TAM of 4.